at it. Have you noticed? They're there. And all of a sudden we exchange that sense of gathering, that sense of hope and anticipation about what Christmas was all about for the things of the world. And of course the things in the world are just not real hopeful. Have you noticed? In fact, sometimes I think we get so busy intentionally to avoid dealing with what's going out there in the world. When you saw the little video clip of the children with Christmas in Kenya, did you think, boy, that's not like our Christmas? But what did you notice? They had hope. They had hope that it would make a difference if they just were faithful. If they just did what God placed before them. And so that young girl who was orphaned at 14 used her hands and did what she could, and God provided through outside resources people to gird her up. And at this Christmas that we see in the video clip, what is she doing? She is sharing the bounty of all she has with the children who have so little. Now that's hope. That's the hope. In the scriptures that we had read today on this very first Advent, we start with the psalm. And so I thought, if you notice, they were all about hope. And the first psalm that we read in 122 is about David's song of hope. His song of anticipation as to what Jerusalem was going to be for the people. And so he writes this message. You know, David wanted to build a temple for God. And here are some of the original stones that were built during the time. And David wanted to build the temple, and you know the story, that God said no. The tabernacle was good enough, but it was sitting on the high hill of Jerusalem. And so what he does is he pens a song. And the song talks about the pilgrimage of everybody coming to that great temple of Jerusalem, to that tabernacle piece, not because of the building, because it didn't exist, but because God's presence was there. The hope and the anticipation, and what the psalmist writes, is about that time when God reigns and everyone is gathered in. 1,000 years before Christ, we have the anticipation that God is going to come and he's going to make justice rule, that love will abound and there will be peace. A few years later, his son does build the wonderful temple, Solomon's temple, and here is a depiction of what it might look like in his time. The grandest building of all. And you know, the vision of what David had in that psalm happens. That people come from all over and all nations seeking to know the peace that only God can give, the hope of that time. Then Isaiah comes about 300 years after David. The peace that Solomon has been torn and rent. We have two nations that are identified as God's people, and most of those tribes of Israel are in the northern area, and they have left Jerusalem. They have set up their own temple to honor God. But in Judah, in the place where Isaiah has called as a prophet, we have Solomon's temple still standing, and Isaiah is a message to the people. In those years when Isaiah was the prophet from 700s to 600s BC, he saw what I see today. What you and I see today. People that claim to be followers of God, to be God's chosen ambassadors, the ones that God has put a hand on to be a light of the world, and they are so busy getting caught up in the things of this world that they have no hope. No hope in the peace and joy and love that God can give us. And so Isaiah writes to call them back. He gives them the woes and the things that will happen when they are not obedient, and he claims in the last part of Isaiah, he gives that vision to Judah. If you are faithful, if you are obedient, God will reign. And in the second chapter of Isaiah, we have this poem about the New Jerusalem. The Jerusalem where all peace and hope can be. And we have a vision. It's called prophetic. Then we have Jesus' time. The first vision of God coming down to earth. And in that place of Jerusalem, we have Herod's temple rebuilt. This is the city that Jesus lived in and saw, the magnificent buildings, the things that were set upon that hill of Zion, of Jerusalem, where God was to reign. And Jesus walked with them, and he learned in that temple. He grew up going there faithfully for those areas. And now he has been there during that past